For much of the 20th century, Burrard Inlet was home to a community of squatters living in houseboats, floating shacks, cabins, and foreshore cottages lifted onto pilings. At their height in the 1930s and 40s, squatter communities in Vancouver were home to over 1,000 people, mostly living without electricity, running water, or plumbing. According to Scott Watson, squatting in the intertidal zone is as old as Vancouver and is an important part of the history of the city. Waterfront squatters' communities evolved in the Vancouver area for various reasons, including poverty and unemployment, adjacency to workplaces, rebellion against social conventions, and a yearning for an unfettered way of life in harmony with nature. The Inlet's most celebrated squatter was Malcolm Lowry, who lived on the Dollarton shores from 1940 to 1954. His community was first inhabited by fishermen and employees of the nearby Dollar Mill in an area we now know as North Vancouver's Kates Park. These were some of Lowry's most productive years, where he wrote much of his classic novel Under the Volcano. According to historian Daniel Francis, squatters have been part of the urban scene in Vancouver for a long time. The term is often used in a pejorative sense, but squatters, despite their marginal lifestyle, have been productive members of the community, holding jobs, raising families, and, in Lowry's case, writing great literature. This is also true for the residents of the Watchman's Cabin, the last existing structure of its kind. For almost 50 years, since 1966, one of the region's foremost experimental artists, Al Neal, lived there. The cabin and its foreshore land were also a home and muse for 35 years to Neal's partner, noted artist Carole Itter, who worked and produced art in and around the cabin beginning in the 1970s. Surrounding the site and in the trees are significant artworks co-created over the decades by Al Neal and Carole Itter. These assemblages drape the site and surround and inhabit the landscape as well as the cabin itself. Although Al Neal lived off the grid, he lived there with the permission of the Mackenzie barge owner and was considered the beach watchman. In 2005, Alexandra Vardy described a visit to Al Neal's cabin. After taking a hidden woodland trail to his rough cabin, perched on top of a small permanently beached barge, seemed as much houseboat as house, we drank tea and discussed art and music to the accompaniment of his cat, making its delicate way across the keys of a battered upright piano. The sun lit up Neal's flotsam assemblages just as surely as the pianist's wayward yet erudite conversation illuminated the idea that it is possible to build a life around constant exploration. For that lesson, I'll always be thankful, as will the thousands of others who learned it under this madman, mystic, and living legend's tutelage. A World War II veteran born in 1924, Al Neal is an artist, sculptor, writer, and jazz pianist who began playing in Vancouver clubs in the late 1940s. He was a central figure in the 50s and 60s at the Cellar Club, where he performed with the Al Neal Quartet and dozens of other musicians. Following his time at the Cellar, Neal pioneered a wholly unique and unusual improv free jazz style and released several recordings which were reissued in the 80s and 90s. He's also known for his writing, visual art, multimedia performances in the 70s, and mixed media collages from the 80s. In 2014, he received the prestigious Lifetime Achievement Award at the Mayor's Arts Awards in Vancouver, which recognizes, quote, an individual who has made significant contributions over his or her lifetime to the cultural vibrancy of the city. For almost 5 decades, he divided his time between Vancouver and the foreshore cabin at Dollarton. Carole Itter, born in 1939, is a sculptor, filmmaker, performance artist, and writer with awards from the Canada Council for the Arts and the British Columbia Arts Council. Much of Itter's artistic works as an experimental artist involve found objects and natural materials. Her opposition to consumer culture is a common thread throughout her work. She's become well known for installations and performances where she carefully crafts recycled materials with striking environmental resonance. The stretch of shoreline on the inlet was a plentiful source of materials that she incorporated into decades of visual and structural works, including a series of films inspired by and shot on location at the cabin. The cabin's structure itself had a storied history. Vince Mason, one of the oldest workers at Mackenzie Barge in Derrick, said it had been built by a Scandinavian craftsman and was originally moored in Cole Harbour. When its builder got a job at Mackenzie Barge, he had the cabin towed to its new location near Kates Park and lifted onto pilings. In September 1966, Ralph Mackenzie offered the cabin to Al Neal, and on his moving in provided him with a single electrical cord from the shipyard, which remained the only power source over the years. All supplies, including food, water, and of course the cabin's piano, had to be carried through the woods down a narrow trail to the water's edge. Over the past 100 years, the cabin's idyllic site has undergone profound transformation. In 2015, the land adjacent to the cabin, Mackenzie Barge and Shipbuilding, was sold to Polygon Homes for redevelopment, and it began its next transformation into the sprawling upscale residential community Kate's Landing. 80 years after the cabin was originally moved to the beach, and almost 50 years after Al Neal moved in, he received another notice, this time a notice of trespass, requiring the cabin to be moved off the beach so the highly contaminated industrial land could be remediated for the new development. A small group of friends, acquaintances, and colleagues of Al's and Carole's began discussing possibilities and various ways to save the cabin. National and local Vancouver media outlets picked up the story and shone a spotlight onto this previously unknown historical structure.
There was a time when such a view wasn't worth $1 million. When living on the edge of Burrard Inlet, albeit in a shack, was cheap, perfect for struggling artists.
I think it was a rich life here, just of people who had a place to hide in some ways, or had a place that was outside the city, that was close to the city, and a very beautiful place.
The arts community is banding together to find the money and the place, because it's about more than a building. It's about history.
Well, you know, now I'm 75. My partner Al Neal is 90. We've had a time here, but at the same time, if something could happen to the cabin itself in terms of preservation, we would be very happy.
Over 3 days in July 2015, the Blue Cabin was picked up off its pilings and moved to its new temporary home a few kilometers down Dollarton Highway. Support has been given by a host of organizations and people, including the Citizens Committee of Port Metro Vancouver, Polygon Homes, Supreme Structural Transport, Connexus, and PM Volunteers. The Watchman's Cabin is the last of hundreds of small dwellings that once dotted the shores of Burrard Inlet and provided homes for many marginalized people, including laborers, seniors, artists, and many other countercultural visionaries who are among those who worked, lived, and created art in squatters' cabins spread along this jurisdictional gray zone that separated water from land. The cabin has strong cultural, historic, and artistic value, and is a highly symbolic building that tangibly connects us to a now vanished way of life, when people could live off the grid within the bounds of a rapidly urbanizing metropolitan area.
There is a house built out of stone, wooden floors, walls, and window sills, tables and chairs warmed by all of the dust. This is a place where I don't feel